already had the stopwatch ready to go, so should I stop that already? All right. I had a really great parental leave. I just came back from parental leave, 5 weeks off. So if you're wondering, yes, I'm back. I mean, here I am, I'm back. And it was really great. I'm really enjoying my summer. And one of the highlights was my daughter Adeline's first birthday. So there she is. You'll see her enjoying her favorite food, blueberry pie. She dug right in. To be one again, huh? She was actually supposed to be here in my arms for this beginning part, but she never woke up from her first nap, so I guess she's still tired from the blueberries. I also had this helium balloon, this #1 balloon from her birthday party, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny if I brought it up here and I pretended to give it to her and I let it go by accident, and then I realized there's a fan up there, so. As I also approach my sabbatical, which starts August 15th, I'm naturally looking back at my first 7 years here and some of the stories that really stick out to me. And I can remember back in maybe 2016, at that point here at Grace, I was doing a lot of free tutoring for the neighborhood. And there was one girl, I think she was Nigerian, her name was Miriam, and we met, I think, 15 or 16 times in the Keshen Goodman Library. And she was in grade 12 when I was helping her with her math and her chemistry. And then maybe the second last time we met together, in the middle of our tutoring session, she gets an email. And it's from Dalhousie saying, you've been accepted to the nursing program. This is exactly, what her goal in life had been, and she was so happy. Can you imagine in the Keshen Goodman Library, standing on her chair and dancing? And it was such a highlight to see her achieve that goal. Well, wouldn't you know, 5 years later, Adeline is born, and we're moved up to that, family unit. And it's time for the nurse's shift to switch. And a nurse walks in and she says, I don't know if you remember me, but you helped me in high school with my chemistry. I thought, oh yeah, I remember you. Very vividly dancing on that chair. Anyway, she was this most wonderful nurse and sort of a full circle moment. Talk about Dennis's God moments there. We're in the middle of the book of James, and James tells it as it is. Faith without works is dead. Yikes. Now, that's been a historically controversial statement. Mike talked about that a little bit, and I'm not really going to dive in to a lot of theology or a lot of the controversy, because I don't think James wants us spending too much time on theology and head knowledge. What James wants us to do is to think about the practical, and so I'll try to focus on that too. There are 3 big words first, though, 3 big religious words in this passage. And the trick about religious language is that we don't tend to use it outside of church very much. Certainly, if you're not in certain circles, you don't use it at all. Also, the thing about religious language is one person can say that word and another person who shares the same faith will think it means a completely different thing. And so I'll just share what I briefly think about 3 of these big words so we're all on the same page. At least you'll be on my page. I want to broadly define some of these terms. We have faith, works, and saved. So when you hear faith, a lot of people, perhaps without even knowing it, think of it sort of as like a mental exercise purely. It's sort of a mental assent. I have faith because I believe the checklist of doctrinal statements that I was passed down or told I'm supposed to believe, and okay, yes in my head, yep, that sounds about right, okay, Jesus, Mary, whatever. And that's sort of the product of the modern mindset, the modern Western Christianity that we find ourselves in. And yes, mentally affirming or believing things, I'm sure that's part of faith, but what I want to say is that faith in this passage has a lot to do about trust. Faith is a relational term. Trusting a person, trusting God, trusting Jesus, and trusting the work that God is doing in the world through Jesus. And when you trust a person, it has implications for your life. When you trust someone, you can lean on them when you need to. You can rely on them. You can even take direction from them because you know they have your best interest in mind. And when we trust, when we have faith in God, we're leaning into that relationship. We're relying on it. We receive the love from God, and then we respond in obedience because we're grateful for that love. And that takes me to that next word. So that's faith. I'm thinking it's more trust than mental assent. And works. It's not just a pizza, flavor. A lot of times when people hear works, they think of the way Paul uses works, which is the works of the Jewish law. But that's actually not what James means. It's actually a different word completely in the Hebrew. And it does get confusing because we hear the word, it means different things at different times. James is talking to Jewish people who live in a Gentile culture, and these people are trying to figure out how to follow Jesus. And so when James says works, what he means is the way that you show that you're faithful to God by loving others. The way that you show you're faithful to God by loving God and loving your neighbor. How do you be his image bearers? How do you be his kingdom of priests? And one particular thing that works means when James talks about it is caring for the poor. When James talks about works, a lot of him means caring for the poor. Living out your faith. It's our Grace Chapel vision statement. Grace Chapel is a diverse community, united by the love of Christ and called to, that's the phrase, embody that love in our neighborhoods. It's embodying that love. Not being religious or abiding by certain X, Y, and Z, but embodying Christ's love in the world. That's what we mean by works in this passage. And the third word is saved. And saved is a really tricky word because it's so central to our Christian identity. And it's often used, validly, especially in evangelical circles, only to mean that you go to heaven when you die. And so you're saved, when you think of saved, I guess if you were to follow the logical thought, saved from hell. I guess is that what the word saved is really talking about? And that's within the definition, but in the Bible, only 7% of the use of the word saved, in the Old Testament actually, it refers to, eternal salvation. Much more often, saved is talking about something physical, or our actual lives, our present, everyday, inner and outer reality. The word comes from the Exodus story. They're physically saved, right, from the oppression of Egypt. And then it becomes a metaphor. We're freed. We're saved from the bondage of sin and evil in our lives. And we're brought into this plan that God has, where everything is leading to rest. Everything is leading to restoration. The plan, certainly, it plays out with future consequences, but it very much has to do right now with how we're saved from evil, from the corruptive forces of the world. I remember Ron Harris saying in a Breaking of Bread meeting, I have been saved, I am being saved, and I will be saved. And I think that really captures kind of the full extent of it. I want to shake off a little bit of this paradigm that says it's only about going to heaven when you die. It's about we're being transformed, we're being liberated now and later. It's a process. And let's, if anything, just remember what Ron said. So I think that's kind of what James is meaning by save, and you'll see it here. Faith without works is dead. That's what he says. Faith and works go together. They're one thing. They're a holistic movement of the Spirit in your life, and they go together. This is how James starts the passage. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who's got no food or clothing, and you say, goodbye, have a great day, stay warm, take care, eat well, be happy. But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it's dead and it's useless. Really, really strong words. I know those need to be nuanced a little bit. And maybe in a conversation afterwards we can do that. But what James is saying, he gives one practical metric to evaluate your faith. And one question: does it functionally make a difference in the world? Does your faith, is it doing anything? Yeah, that's really convicting. For me personally, when you think like what functional difference has my faith made in my life? Because I definitely fall into that trap of, it's all in my head, it's just about mentally affirming or denying things, and you kind of get lost in an intellectual sphere. And, we are called to God, love God with all our mind, but what about here? What about here with the people that we're surrounded with? And he uses that example of, serving the poor. It's not just an example. I think when James says, when you meet someone without their needs met and you don't meet their needs, I don't think it's just an example. At the heart of the Jewish and Christian faith really is serving the poor. Like, it is right there. It is one of Jesus' main focuses of his mission. It's one of the main themes of, the Christian movement in the world is serving the poor. so I do not want to lose the emphasis on serving the poor. I can remember as youth group ended one night in February. It was the coldest night of the year, not the event, but literally the coldest night of the year. And at the end of youth group, the parents come in and they're milling around and they're waiting for their kids, and you're trying to make sure everything goes in the right place, all the people at least. And I saw one couple of parents that I didn't recognize. And I go up to them, I'm talking to them, and they're not looking for any kids. Can I use the phone? That's what they say. Okay, sure. Here's the story. They're a Mormon family. They drove here from, I don't know where. Probably not as far as Utah, but they drove here far, far away to attend some kind of conference. They just get here. They have a baby. She's pregnant with another, and it is the coldest night of the year. And guess what? They can't unlock their Airbnb across the street. What are they going to do? It's like 9 o'clock at night. Well, that church has a light on. So they come in, they ask to use the phone. They can't figure it out. Everyone leaves. It's just me and them. What am I going to do? I'm tired. I want to go home. But what is this family going to do? They have a baby. It's freezing outside. They just drove across the country. I was really torn. But I stayed with them, I chatted with them, I got to know them a little bit. We figured out what was going on, and on their way, and they got in safely. But that was one of those moments where, well, here's a need. What are you going to do? And as much as I really didn't want to, I knew that the need was there, and God wants you to meet that need at that time. Forget about any theological differences between whoever and whoever. It doesn't matter. They have a need. And what James is trying to do, he's really trying to weave these two concepts of faith and works together. If you have faith, you're going to live a life of faithfulness, right? You're going to live a life of faithfulness. If your faith is real, at least. He weaves them together. Faith and works are one. And again, you can go down theological rabbit trails. Well, how much action, saves me or whatever? I don't even know if it's worth having that conversation. Certainly not from this position. I don't think James is trying to say you're not saved by faith alone. I think James and Paul would agree with each other, but I think James would say that your saving faith is not something. It's never alone. We're saved by faith alone, but your saving faith is never alone. Faith justifies. Faith makes us right with God. But if it's just faith by itself, maybe that's a different question. Put really simply, we're not saved by our deeds, by our works, by our action, but we are saved for them. We are saved for deeds. We are saved for action and saved for works. Paul says this in Ephesians. For it is by grace that you've been saved through faith. It's not from yourselves, it's a gift of God. Not by works, there it is, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. We're not saved by our deeds, but we are saved for them. To stand on the promises, to show God's promises to the world, like Stacey said. When we love God, we also love our neighbor. I didn't make that one up. That's Jesus. When we love God, we love our neighbor. And it's not just important to recognize this because it's true, but it's important if we're thinking about passing on our faith to the next generation, which is something I do as a youth pastor. We have to realize that if our faith is going to be attractive in the slightest, we really got to put the works piece in there. Our faith and works really have to be integrated. And unless the next generation can see that the good news is something that we actually embody, actually live out, rather than something we just talk about on a Sunday morning, it's not going to seem attractive. We use the word gospel a lot, and the gospel should be not just this religious solution that we present to people, but it should also be a way of life that we live out. And again, teenagers are they're like today's prophets, and they can call us back to say, well, stop thinking so much about the future, but start thinking more about the present. They're more inclined to believe Jesus' words when he says that he's here to bring good news to the poor, freedom to prisoners, sight for the blind, justice for the oppressed. And when Jesus read that scroll, he said, this is happening today. Right now, this movement is happening. Faith and works are one. They go together. We breathe in God's love, and we exhale it right back into the world. So I was, preparing for this sermon and reading over James 2. It's a really convicting passage, and it applied to a decision that I had to make quite recently. You see, with Allison going back to school, soon we decided we're going to rent out our basement. And we put it online, and of course, there's a housing crisis in Halifax. Literally more than 100 people applied to rent our basement. And we found 3. We're going to give viewings to 3 candidates. So we let them come in for the viewings, and I thought, okay, there's no way we're choosing from outside these 3. It took a lot of mental effort. We go down to 3 people, and so okay, we're gonna stick to the plan. One of these 3, which is it going to be? And we basically closed the ad until we saw we had another applicant. We had said we really want single people. We want someone who's quiet and respectful, low maintenance. And we had a couple of Ukrainians apply for the unit. And so, I don't know, like the first time you see that, you're like, okay, what is this going to entail? What is this going to look like? And we met them, and they turned out to be, just as lovely as, our best candidates. But I personally was a little bit hesitant, not just because I don't like changing plans, and I really don't, but because, I didn't know what exactly this would require. Allison was more on board from the get-go, but I was pausing. But at the same time, I'm reading this passage. If you meet someone who has a need, and you say, good luck out there, it's complex, right? All sorts of other people had this need. Who might offer one thing to somebody and something else to another person? It's complex. But sometimes Scripture speaks to you, and you just have a sense of what God is trying to say. And they signed the lease, and they'll be moving in a couple of weeks. I'm really looking forward to it. But it wasn't what we had planned at first. But it is how the Scripture spoke to me. Especially those words of Jesus that said, when you feed them, you feed me. When you care for them, you care for me. And okay, this is it. James would tell us that our faith should change how we live. Obviously it should. That's not news. But read this when he continues from verse 18. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith and other people have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I'll show you my faith by my good deeds. You say you have faith, but for you believe there's one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe that, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? So James kind of creates this hypothetical objection. You say this, and actually it's sort of a modern thing. So James's objection is this imaginary person saying, well, okay, your good deeds are all well and good, and that's a valid expression of your faith, but for me, my faith is just, I believe, and that's good, right? That's good enough, and I agree with all the good things. One God, okay, sure. And James is saying, well, prove it. Prove it. It's a really modern objection where we can easily take faith and make it all like an inner mental exercise. And it's a contradiction in terms, this kind of argument. Again, because our faith and our works and our deeds, they're all woven together and they're vital for each other. You actually can't have one without the other. It's like me asking you, what's more important, breathing or eating? If you had to choose one, well, if you stop breathing, you won't be eating lunch today. And if you stop eating, you won't be eating lunch tomorrow. They go together. And if you want to know what someone believes, you look at their actions. Your actions actually show what you believe. And let me assert that your faith is not genuine unless it moves you to some sort of action. I'm not talking about it has to look like this kind of action or this kind of action, nothing showy per se, but unless your faith moves you to action, what kind of faith is it? Again, I normally wouldn't speak this directly, but this is what James is saying. And I don't think James would condemn, again, what Paul is saying. We're not Paul the Apostle. He's not condemning that, but he's saying, hey, if you say something is true, and you accept that fact, and you don't allow that to have any influence on your life, well, he might condemn that. He might not condemn Paul, but he'd condemn anyone who says they accept a fact and don't let it influence their life. James is trying to say that your faith is no substitute for your obedience. Your faith is no substitute for your obedience. And in that video that maybe some of you have watched from the Bible Project talking about the book of James, there's just a really simple line that I like. It says, genuine faith always results in obedience to Jesus' teaching. When I say obedience, we're not just talking about obedience to some abstract moral code or being a good person. Obedience to Jesus' teachings. Genuine faith results in obedience to Jesus' teachings, specifically. And James, perhaps being the little brother of Jesus, certainly influenced by the Sermon on the Mount. It's pretty clear. This is like Sermon on the Mount 2.0. And Jesus, in Matthew 7, is probably what he's inspired by the most. A couple lines from Matthew 7. When talking about false prophets, Jesus says, "How will you recognize a false prophet? By their fruit, you'll recognize them. By how they live their lives. That's how you're supposed to evaluate people that claim to come in God's name." He says a little bit later in the chapter, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice," emphasis on puts them into practice, "is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." James is not making this stuff up. This is from his big brother. This is straight from Matthew 7. And for many, the gospel is presented as just this way to go to heaven. And Paul is not trying to say that, and neither is James, and neither is Jesus. None of them wanted emotional converts who are just out to save their own behind because they've been scared into this faith thing. They all want solid, world-changing Christians who make a difference with their generosity and their relationships and their lives. James is sort of a mentor for us about what it looks like to live out saving faith. A saving faith, not just one that takes us to heaven when we die, but starts saving us now. Starts to transform us from the corruptive powers of the world, or from the corruptive forces on the inside. I got these 3 points from a commentary from a guy named Webster. What does a saving faith look like? A saving faith serves, sacrifices, and subverts. This is all from James. A saving faith serves. At the beginning of this passage, there is this example. You meet a person who has a need. What are you going to do? So when you serve the poor is the primary example of a faith lived out. And we can generalize to say it's about meeting the needs of people around us, but again, I don't want to lose the emphasis on serving the poor. It is right there at the beginning. It's so close to Jesus' heart. A serving faith is one that sees the need of someone else and says that their need is also my need. It accepts the responsibility personally for the needs of other people. I'm not talking about overstepping one's boundaries or taking on more than you can carry, but in general, you see the needs of someone else and you say, it's my responsibility to meet those needs. It overcomes indifference. It ignores any rationalization that says, that's not really my problem, so I'm not going to touch that. And it challenges any sort of safe retreat into our own cocoon. A saving faith loves your neighbor like you love yourself, and it does so in very practical ways. It's so appropriate that as we're going through the book of James, we have the Sunday suppers right in the middle of the series. Well, we're near the end, actually. This is kind of what it's all about, actually. And if you don't know what the Sunday suppers is, talk to anyone here who knows. Most of us do. But it is about serving the less fortunate. So, of course, I encourage you to make a meal. It just feels right. This cottage cheese bake, make the meal and bring it. Or maybe don't bring a meal and just volunteer. Behind the scenes, sit with the folks, talk to them, interact with the guests. I haven't done that in a while. I haven't volunteered at the Sunday suppers in a long time. But again, I feel like this is what I feel convicted to do, and I'm going to bring a couple kids from the youth group, and we're going to do it because I feel like this is the call for us at this time. So I really encourage you to take that practical step. A saving faith serves. A saving faith sacrifices. James goes on to talk about Abraham. And I won't read the passage just to save a little bit of time, but it's all about Abraham is an example of a faith that really made a difference because he was willing to sacrifice his son. Now, I'll acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is that that's a really difficult story, and that's a really challenging example to use. And we don't really have time to dive into it. Let's talk about it afterwards. Let's read a good book, watch a good video. Let's just step around the rabbit hole of sacrificing your own child, because I think there's a little bit more to that story. At the heart of the story, it's about a person who's flawed, but who still decides to trust God, even if it means setting their hopes and dreams aside. His hopes and dreams are not bad things. Guess what? Guess who gave him those hopes and dreams? God. And it's about that child. So that makes it extra difficult. But whatever his hopes and dreams were, in the present moment, God called him to do something. He was going to let God take precedent over those hopes and dreams. He's going to give up something dear to him, because he trusted God. He knows that somehow God is going to keep his promise. I don't know how. And if you let your faith become something that works, and that's what I'm calling this sermon, a faith that works. If you let your faith be something that makes a difference in the world, it's going to involve some measure of sacrifice. Sometimes we'll have to do things we don't want to do, show love to people we don't care about, go out of our way, just give away something that you earned. It's rightfully yours. Give it away. And this is a process of being formed into Christ's likeness. It's all about sacrifice. The Christ who loved us and gave himself for us, who though he was rich for our sake became poor so that we could become rich through his poverty. It's the process of being shaped in the image of Christ, and it involves sacrifice, big or small. A saving faith, lastly, subverts, and this is a tough one. A saving faith serves, sacrifices, subverts. He ends with a little something about Rahab. So here it is. Rahab, the prostitute. That's another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so faith is also dead without good works. So maybe it seems a little weird that after mentioning Abraham, who is sort of the father and sort of the image of perfection in a lot of ways, he then goes to a much more obscure, much more morally ambiguous character, although I'd argue Abraham is just as morally ambiguous. And we have not only a Gentile character, but also someone certainly looked down upon by society because of her job. And yet in the story, who's the hero? Rahab. Because she saves spies and she kind of subverts the empire that she lives in and allows God's plan to take place. And why does James put Rahab next to Abraham? They couldn't be more different, right? Well, James is subverting us and saying that God's saving faith is no respecter of persons. You don't have to be the glorious patriarch of the faith. You can be like Rahab. And a saving faith doesn't just mean you have to look like this, or like this, or like this. It is a very subversive thing to say, because it really does upend a lot of the cultural norms, not only of Jewish culture, but even our culture. And Rahab herself, of course, a subversive person, by hiding spies, allowing the downfall of her own empire to take place. Again, that's a really challenging story, and not one we're going to dive into too much. Step around the moral ambiguity, and let's say this. Sometimes, to follow Jesus, we have to choose not to cooperate with the powers that be. Sometimes we have to choose not to cooperate with empire. Sometimes we have to choose to live in a way that goes against the grain of governing forces, or at least the status quo where it oppresses and it marginalizes. We can think of things like colonialism, all sorts of privileges, or even just the proper way of doing things. We have to subvert that and go against that sometimes. In the name of Jesus, sometimes you gotta redraw those lines of who's in and who's out. We gotta love and learn from the outsider. Not just care for them, but learn from them. Care for the outcast and learn from them. Bring the marginalized into your family and allow them to bring you into their family. Sometimes, as one of my favorite songs says, we have to look into the eyes of our enemy and see our brother and our sister. I've got a few stories from my life that sort of illustrate this, and I won't claim to have lived a life that subverts empire in any profound way. I know there are many other better stories, but all I have is stories from my own life, so what can I say? I've got two, and I'll just say one. But I remember being at Acadia at university, and there's a certain almost a holiday that takes place every year. And it's called Cheatin' Cup, and it's a drinking event. The idea is this residence and that residence are going to play a hockey game together. And, rich tradition, 50 years, well, rich tradition, sure, but it's just an excuse to, let loose. And I'm not condemning that particular thing in general, but this was actually a really corruptive practice for the university. People die. People died. I remember people dying from over-drinking while I was at Acadia. And just all inhibitions gone. And not only that, but the tension and the competitiveness in the air of, pick your side, who you're cheering for in the hockey game. And it just makes enemies out of friends very easily. And it's just kind of like static, prickling in the air, this really tense and sort of corruptive event. And again, I don't want to condemn that too much. I want to condemn equally my own attitudes towards that, because in Christian bubbles, sometimes it's very easy to demonize others and it's to say that's bad and I'm good and I'm in a separate place. And so I think for a couple of years, my Christian circle sort of had that hypocritical, judgmental attitude towards them. But a particular year, we felt that we wanted to subvert this practice. Not in any profound way, but we're going to use our own money and we're going to go to the store and we're going to buy as many bottles of water as we could carry, and then we'll just walk around passing them out to the people that are going to the arena for the hockey game. Dilute the alcohol. And we became fast friends with a lot of people. And again, not a profound or a brilliant thing to do, but it did seem to bring an element of peace to the crowd. And I really felt like God was smiling on that peace in a way, because shortly thereafter, wouldn't you know, at the end of March, a soft and gentle snow falls down and just kind of causes a quiet to fall over the whole campus. And again, that's just maybe a simple way that we try to subvert this practice going on in the culture, but also the practice, the attitudes that we had in our own heart. It's easy to have a sermon on James 2 and make it all about theology. Well, I don't want to jump straight to that. It's not about faith versus works or James versus Paul. I feel like if Jesus saw us debating theology, he'd say, maybe not for me, and he'd go spend time with the tax collector and the Samaritan woman and the sinner, etc. Because the practical metric of our faith is what good is it really doing in the world. I'll give Paul some credit, because Paul has this beautiful chapter about love. And when we talk about saving faith and works, it's all about love. It's about a serving, sacrificial, and subversive love. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men or angels, but don't have love, I'm just a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, can fathom all mysteries, all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, note that, if I give all I possess to the poor, and I give over my body to hardship that I can boast, but I don't have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And when you think about your own life, let's add a few more verbs to this. Love lends a helping hand. Love helps a friend carry that box when they're moving. Love feeds the hungry. Love befriends the lonely. Love asks you how you're really doing. Love offers to hold that crying baby and get up in the middle of the night to feed them. Love listens. Love laughs. Love sits with you. Love makes sure you get home safe. Love drives you home. And love gives you a call just to say hi. Love moves close to the difficult person. Love cleans up the messy bathroom when no one is watching. Love sets the judgment aside and accepts people for who they are. Love cooks, sings, hugs, and takes an interest. Love hopes, love works, love believes, and love never fails. Amen.